I don't think many would dispute that Mega Man X7 is a bad game, and there's a number of reasons for this. You can lock yourself out of some power-ups, you can't play as the series' main character for the majority of the game, the voice acting is pretty terrible, but those are just the minor gripes. The two big issues, in my opinion, are just how poorly the characters control, and how terrible the levels are. That said, there is exactly one stage in the game that I kind of like, that I would classify as almost good, Vanishing Gungaroos. The question is, does the stage have actual merit to it, or is it just an example of a starving person convincing themselves that a burnt dish made primarily out of mud is actually delicious? I'm Wes the Explosion, and I want to take a look at this very specific section of X7 to summarize the bigger problem. You start out in this winding tunnel, and if you look around the first large-ish room, you'll find a ride armor, so this is a good start. I mean, who doesn't love ride armor? Whether you grab it or not can kinda determine the pace of the level though. As you make your way down this tunnel, you have to keep an eye out for enemies, these weird barrel obstacles, and any civilian Reploids you can rescue. There's also some doors in the wall, and taking out the nearby enemies will make it safe for the hidden friendlies inside to open up. And hey, I think this is pretty great, since you need to remain cognizant of the 3D space. You can't just charge ahead, you need to pay attention to what you're coming up on. In the 2D space, this can sometimes be a problem just because of the smaller screen, but here, it's more about minding your angles, peeking around the corners with the fixed camera as well as you can, and also keeping an eye out for sections of the wall that aren't actually walls but a locked off recess. If you take the ride armor, you can plow through most of the small enemies, but the barrel obstacles are more of a problem. Given how small the tunnel is, you can't really get around them too well and have to take a moment to blow them up with your shoulder missiles. Or you can say screw that and charge right through, using the armor to tank damage and get through the area pretty quickly, at the cost of your vehicle. And if you don't want to mess with the ride armor at all, you can zip around a lot easier. You still have to keep an eye out for what's lurking around the corner, but it's easier to react and also get around the bigger obstacles on foot. I'd also say that the turret wall that pops up partway through is a lot more manageable with just your basic weapons. This shows up throughout the game. You need to take out each gun individually, so they were obviously designed to teach the player to make full use of the lock-on introduced in X7. While this is easy enough solo, it doesn't seem to work too well with the ride armor, which seems more interested in firing its minigun at something behind it. And if I were feeling generous, I could give the game credit for maybe using this to test the player, seeing if they're clever enough to hop out and take care of the wall personally, then retrieve their mech once they finish. But with as cramped as the tunnel is and how easy it can be to pop yourself back into the driver's seat while moving around, your vehicle can end up becoming an obstacle in and of itself. Then again, maybe that's what the cubbies on either side of the wall are there for, but who wants to do a park job while getting shot at? So yeah, there's something a bit ironic about the game introducing ride armor, right when things are getting really cramped, yet with the 3 ways you can tackle this tunnel, slow and steady, light on your feet, or recklessly burning your resources, I'd say it's actually one of the more cleverly designed sections. Fight through that and we get to probably the best room in the game. You get an open space where you can either take the obvious path to the right, hop on the raised platforms through the center and to the left, or take an armor through the ankle-deep acid covering the floor. And hey, if you broke yours already, there's a new set, this one punching things with its drill arms. And this is a room that it pays to explore. You have some Reploids you can rescue on ledges, 1 or 2 in the acid, there's 1 in a cubby, though not in the gated off one, not sure why they put that small closet in if they weren't going to do anything with it. And if you take the obvious route to the right, there's 2 more laser firing walls to deal with, which would be a pain, but are easy to get around, so it really feels like they're encouraging you to take a more creative route, be it checking out every nook and cranny, or simply dash jumping across the middle, civilians in distress be damned. After that, you get 2 rooms, where you have to take out sets of enemies, including another laser wall and some ride armor as well. Pretty simple, although this is typically where I lose whichever ride armor I'm using, either due to the first taking a lot of damage on the way in, or the second just being awkward to use, due to its short stature and limited range. Then you get to the boss room, but before you go up against him, you have to take on waves of ride armor, in an arena ringed by several towers. This room isn't too bad either. You can climb the towers to get a vantage point or just temporarily retreat, and find some upgrades in the process. You can also use them for cover, ignore me just taking on the enemies with simple strafing. And if you manage to sneak your own armor in, you also get a bit of an advantage. though there is an extra set of the flaily drill hand one if you look. Once you're done, you finally face off against Gungaroo, who I love conceptually at least. A kangaroo with boxing gear, since they're known to be pretty savage hand to hand, with the boss being the Joey in the pouch of his own custom ride armor like it's his mama. The question is though, is she single? For the fight itself though, the first phase is easy, but the extra health is annoying and Gungaroo moves around so much for the second, you're likely to get whiplash trying to keep the camera on him. Seriously, just steal Z targeting from Zelda. Surely they can't copyright a single button lock on. And if you manage to babysit your own ride armor all the way in, you can use it against the boss as well. While it can be hard to use due to how clunky it is and having to contend with the camera, it is kind of fun watching two ride armors go up against each other. It's pretty much worthless against Gungaroo himself though. Beat him, clear the level, and get a really powerful weapon that some of the harder bosses endgame are weak to. Wow, what a deal. Now back to the stage select, once you manage to navigate the menu. This stage does two things right, in my opinion. The first is how they utilize ride armor. Yeah, them throwing it in right as you get into cramped spaces is a little stressful, but it's definitely designed as a challenge to see how long you can make the weapon last. If you're pretty good, you'll get through with the first set, which is the better version in my opinion, and be in good shape for the waves of enemy armors at the end. If you fail, take the clumsier one as your consolation prize, which is better than nothing. While the 2D games did this, normally there were barriers in place and you couldn't take it through the full level. Probably the most famous instance was from Magma Dragoon's area, where you could take it into the actual boss fight, like you can do here too, though it was pretty close to the end with that, so it was pretty much guaranteed unless you were really clueless. What they have here though is such a fun idea that it's not surprising that they reused it for X8. Though in that, it's more of a puzzle, rather than an endurance test, though there were still elements of that thrown in. The thing that Vanishing Gungaroo stage does that I really like though, and you might have noticed me touch on this, is that it actually makes use of the 3D environment. The first section, while linear, is so twisty-turny that you have to be peeking around corners so that you don't run into anything nasty that could hurt you or your ride armor. Then you get to the big room, which you can come at any way you want. Either take the obvious path, explore everything to rescue Reploids for upgrades, possible achievements, and just the warm fuzzies inside, or just dash right through because you really want to be done with this game. I don't have anything clever to say about the next section, just beat the baddies, simple enough. Then the waves of ride armor after that are much the same, but better since the towers give you some maneuvering options, as well as rewards for engaging with the level, and we're back to my starving analogy. I mean, yeah, these are kind of good I guess, but they're also really basic. The tunnel tests your awareness, but is also just largely a straight path that someone could have doodled on a napkin, with copy-pasted obstacles other than the laser wall, which gets copy-pasted later. And like I said earlier, the section can feel a little claustrophobic. And while the next room is the best use of 3D space in the game, giving you not only options but incentive for exploring, it's relatively small, maybe not for this game, but most other 3D ones, making it a blink and you'll miss it experience in a game that should be chock full of this sort of thing. And yeah, you can use the towers in the last part to get yourself some advantages, but the action is so slow paced in this game that you don't really need to do that. It's a good idea that deserves a better game. Compared to everything else X7 has to offer though, it's downright brilliant. The 2D levels are pretty damn boring. Stone Kong's having exactly one hidden path, while Tunyon's is literally just go right, other than the sub-boss and boss rooms. And while Warflies is 3D, it's so linear, with just a few boxes to peek around for hidden upgrades, that most of the levels in previous games had more nooks to poke around. Hyanard's is a mix of both. Go right for the first half, with the second, while having a wide area with scattered platforms, have a very specific way to advance. To sum them up, they're boring. Despite having a whole extra dimension to play around with, they somehow manage to be incredibly dull, more so than pretty much everything that came before. There are some stages with good ideas though, but they're so incompetently put together that they're not exactly fun. Flipping the stage is really cool on paper, but it's hard to tell what sections are blocked off where and how they connect. So that Anteater's level is a pretty miserable affair. Not to mention Barfy. And a track with bombs and potential rescuees scattered around it that you have to zip around on a ride chaser to retrieve sounds awesome. But when the optimal strategy is to just creep around it at a snail's pace so that you don't miss anything, I think what you actually miss is the point. Crowwing's level also comes close, since I actually do have fun checking out the different paths and side rooms once you get inside his ship. But when the first half of the stage is that god-awful jumping from plane to plane section, I can't bring myself to actually like it. And don't even get me started on the endgame levels. There is nothing good there. That does bring up another point in Gungaroo's favor though. I always take him on last. Partly due to boss order, partly due to his fight being a pain in the ass, so that I want to be running on all cylinders. Because of this, I tend to have at least Axel pretty well powered up, and when you have a character's movement maxed out, while it still isn't ideal, it's at least passable. Yeah, you heard me right. Not great, but at least somewhere close to what it should be. Just in time for you to be almost done with the game, and only if you've been especially diligent. My point is, having better options does make a stage seem a lot more tolerable. Not only that, but by then I've also seen pretty much everything else the game has to offer, so it's easier for something mediocre to seem good by comparison. Maybe the starving analogy isn't as appropriate as one dying of thirst in the desert and seeing a mirage. Logically, you know you're probably not seeing an actual body of water, but by that point, you're probably desperate enough to believe that you are. So that's what Vanishing Gungaroo stage is for me. Not an oasis in the desert, but the illusion of one. It scratches the surface of what a 3D Mega Man X level should be, but is so insubstantial that it's just vapor. To sum things up, Vanishing Gungaroo stage isn't good, it's just almost good, which makes me think of X7 on the whole. It plays like crap, but enough power-ups and you can almost get some nice movements out of it. If they tighten things up just a bit more, it might have felt more in line with the previous games. And for the stages, there are some good ideas here. It almost feels like the team behind it was really passionate at the planning phase, then completely lost interest when it came time to actually make the full game. To put it another way, X7 feels like an amazing game that never made it past the first draft. While I'm not as harsh on the entry as most, I'd still call the game a colossal disappointment. It could have done so much better, and Gungaroo's stage is just the one that gets the closest to scratching the itch that is what I want from a 3DX title. I'm done though. While this might have been a pointless discussion, it's been rattling around in my head for a while, so I just had to get it out there. And hey, it's the viewer participation part of the video. While asking which stage is your favorite might be going too far, I will ask which one you think is the best relative to the others, and whether you think any of them actually had any potential. Don't strain yourself though. With that, thanks for humoring me on this, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man. Still like X7 a lot more than X6. I mean, for everlasting peace!